Let's call this meeting to order. Roll.
Showalter.
Here.
Myers.
Here.
Howard.
Present.
Here.
Thompson.
Here.
Yes.
Who are you? You're okay.
Okay, we are here for a special work session for KMEA 101, and I will pass the floor to whoever would like to take it over.
Yeah, so I will start. Appreciate everybody joining us tonight. Hopefully we can give you a little insight of what KMEA is. I'm Tyson Revere. I'm pretty new to KMEA, been there about a year. I was in Colby for almost 10 years as the city manager there, and then moved over to the KMEA team. So still get to work with cities, which I love, and help with all the things that cities do. So we'll kind of get started. We really hope this is very interactive. So Tom and I would love questions. Every slide is required to have one question. No. Mary has 32. No. But in all honesty, if there's something like, hey, I don't quite get that, or explain that, or you made a typo, just holler at us. So we want it to be pretty interactive.
Okay.
I think most of you are at least know the name KMEA. You know, we help with the Tantalus project and some of those other things. Just a little history. We were formed in 1980. Primary reason we were formed was communities like Goodland Municipal Utility Systems to get access at that time to a bigger coal plants, to get access to power resources that cities normally can't do or can't do by themselves. They're just not a big enough piece of the pie for a coal plant to say, yeah, we'll sell you power. So that's really how we were formed. And since 1980 till now, we've grown exponentially in offering services. It was a handful of Northwest cities that actually formed KMEA. Colby, Hill City, Oakley was one of them, and Ellis. They've since sold their systems. But as you can see, we're every corner of the state literally, with cities. We're adding a couple more this April at our board meeting in the northeast part of the state. So I think we'll have around 88 members. I think there's 118 municipal systems. So we cover 3/4 or over 3/4 of the municipal electric systems in the state of Kansas. So it's pretty exciting. Ranging from cities of literally 50 meters, so about 70 people. Our largest city is Grand City. We'll talk about, we've got 37 employees. We'll talk about how we made that big jump here a couple years ago, and a few more slides. And we're project-based, which Tom's going to talk about what that means. Essentially, we buy stuff in projects or systems. So Tom will cover that a little better. So when you think about our structure, what KMEA is, think about we're just like a city. Actually, we're formed as a quasi-municipality. So we're a city. KMEA, we've got a board of directors. So the citizens, so every city, no matter the size, gets a seat on our board. So there are citizens, they direct us, and then the executive board runs day-to-day operations. Dustin, thankfully, is part of our exec board. So he meets monthly with our team to make those day-to-day operations. So again, very similar to a city, how we're ran and set up. We're a nonprofit, tax-exempt entity. We do have a sister organization that works with our gas cities. There's a lot of, or several gas systems, municipally owned gas systems, that they help buy and sell gas for those, and then also bigger power plants that they sell gas to and help them out. So,
How big is that organization compared to yours?
So the gas side has 2 full-time employees. I think they've got 20. They serve 26 members, I believe. Yeah. Yeah. Somewhere right in there. And they are all technically KMEA employees, and then there's an interlocal agreement between those 2 entities So,
Generally speaking, they also handle the gas supply for like all our municipal cities that have natural gas. Not all of them, the vast majority of them that have that generator, that they handle that piece of gas. Even if they don't, they're not the LDC, you know, sometimes a city might not have the gas part of it in their city. They might not be a gas utility, but they still have gas for their power plant.
Mhm.
We handle that piece with it also, so.
Okay.
20 some odd.
it would be like, you know, you guys don't own the gas system throughout town. I think you're Black Hills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But Dustin burns natural gas at the power plant. Well, we could sell Dustin natural gas.
Okay, yeah, gotcha. Thank
Is
you.
that typically larger cities that have the gas side, or is that just kind of all over the board?
All over the board, again, cities of 50 people to, I think our largest gas city is the city of Winfield. And they've got quite a bit of industry. But I would say that the vast majority are still cities of 800 to 2,000 would be the mean average, similar to our electric cities. You know, we're still a small town company, even though we're in Overland Park, we serve mostly small rural customers. So. Good question, Ken. So here's a quick snapshot of what we do under the services we offer outside of electric supply. Tom runs our electric operations group. We've got a 24/7 desk that does all of our power supply planning. Transmission security, I won't read all these off. But some of your basic member services things. Some new stuff that we've added in the last few years. We did a strategic plan in 2019. And the strategic committee came to us and said, we need more help, we need more services, we need these things. So we put those, I didn't, but Paul and the team put those in over the last few years. One of those, rate studies. You guys have probably talked to Darren with the water and electric rate studies. That's new to the organization since 2019, I believe Darren got there. Lineman services is relatively new, a couple years old. We'll talk about that in a little later, and then mid-states we'll talk about later too. We've added, and then we've added an in-house attorney to help with some legal things for us and communities this last year. Speaking of mid-states, you guys probably have heard of mid-states. They do quite a bit of work out here. Mike Schmatter probably has been here. We bought mid-states a couple years ago. They were a small firm out of Salina. They do full service engineering, primarily focus on power plant work, substation work. They are doing some line work now, pole replacements and some of that with our lineman services. As you can see, they're kind of a front end clear through power plant construction team. So they've grown exponentially. I think when we purchased them, they had 8 or 9 employees. I think they've got 17 now. So they've really probably need to add more. There's more work than time right now with that group. A lot of cities are doing projects, replacement projects, a lot of power plant projects. So here's one really cool thing. Actually, this is kind of Jerry's. You guys all probably know Jerry Beaker. This has been him and Tom's brainchild. They've been working on it the last couple of years. A lot of cities needed generation, wanted generation, but couldn't figure out how to make it work. So Jerry and Tom have been working really hard the last couple of years to work on a financing program that runs through KMEA to help those cities build generation for their community. Some of it's been replacement of current power plants. We've got one community that hasn't had a power plant for 20, 30 years, and they're adding a power plant back into their community. So been a really nice program. We've thus far partnered with CAP, and they're kind of engines in a box. They aren't in a traditional power plant like what Goodland has, but been a really nice program helping those communities out that need generation. So Winter Storm Uri, which is kind of a 4-letter word in our industry, really has pushed communities to go, hey, we need to control things a little more locally, so they're putting in more generation. Here's our attorney, Terry Pemberton. Terry came on board right at a year ago. She's our in-house attorney, so she handles everything for us in-house. Does a lot of regulatory things at the KCC. She actually worked for the KCC for a number of years. Does a lot of stuff with SPP. They're intervening something specific to you guys when Sunfire does a rate tariff on your transmission. They say that Sunfire wants to raise transmission rates to X. Terry and Darren will go in and fight for, hey, no, that's not fair. You need to bring that back down to this. So they intervene with the KCC quite a bit on our community's behalf, whether they're in the Sunfire territory or the Evergy territory.
So I have a question on that last slide, where you said that they're doing production plans. So like, and maybe doesn't answer this too, but our engines are like 1950 models or 1930 models. How much are those in comparison to a new model like we have? Is that something that we would be interested in? I mean,
Additional generation, I think, in the future. Not really sure on gaining like 16 megawatts right now.
It'd be about a 16
Okay.
megawatt, but incremental generation, they're 3 megawatt cat units is what these are. You can install them for around three million bucks for a 3 megawatt cat unit. That's $1 million a megawatt installed capacity for those. And that's got the new controls on it and everything, probably similar to what you thought what the cost was. But that cost has really gone up in the last probably 2 years to that number. It's just exponentially risen because of supply chain and because of manpower and labor and every other thing. But that's where it's at right now.
So what does one of our engines produce?
Produce?
Yeah, so like that's a 3 megawatt. How does
We
it
have
compare?
several different producing units, so that way we can match what our load is. So, our highest producing is a little over 5 megawatts, and our lowest producing was 700 kW. So we don't, that's a 1938 strictly diesel unit, we don't even run. So it's like a Sherman diesel power plant. I don't think it's insured either. I don't think anything at the power plant's insured right anymore. So.
What's
Your
the,
power plant is a huge investment, and it's a huge asset for your city. The cities that have power plants are the ones that have a little more control over their costs. I think.
what's the fuel consumption
That's diesel, that's a diesel.
Those are diesel.
per, like, how much consumption per hour? To go back and figure that back.
Don't quote me on this. I'm gonna say 200 to 300 gallon an hour.
I don't know the answer to that.
But don't
I'll
quote
go
me
with
on
what you just said.
So we put, when I was in Colby, we put one of these, we were joking on the way here. I put one of these, I didn't, but the city did 4 years ago, and they're getting ready to put another one in this year. The first one we bought, this included a bunch of substation work. We bought it for less than $2 million. Now you can't buy the engine for $3 million.
Yeah.
So the engine, when we bought that, was about 1.5, and now the engine alone is 2.5.
Yeah, so 2.4, 2.5 is what the new quotes were getting with the 2-year lead time.
Now that cost includes the box you see in Johnson City. That's the box and everything. Now, if you guys put it in your power plant, there may be some variables there that Mike could actually work with you guys to give you some cost estimates if that was ever something you wanted to throw out there. So.
And I might mention that Mid-States, KMEA, has done work at our power plant for at least 30 years. And you'd call them at 2 o'clock in the morning and they could tell you, they knew our plant as well as we did. I mean, they're a great asset, so.
That's what made the marriage between KMA purchasing, we're all municipals, that's the only people we can work for. And that's pretty much who Mike worked for when he owned Mid-States. It was just a beautiful marriage when we purchased them because we worked for the same people.
Mhm.
So, same missions. Yeah. Good question, man. You want to write a check this afternoon?
Yeah. Yeah,
Get one
yeah,
in order.
sure. I'll see if Aaron will sign it.
Yeah, that he's gonna sign that one.
Yeah, sure, I think Penn's take both signatures.
So Darren Princeton, I think you guys all know Darren. He's the one that does a lot of rate studies. He also does some regulatory work. He works with FERC, a lot with Evergy, or not with Evergy, but intervening with Evergy on some of their rate tariff stuff, Sunflower's rate tariff stuff. Darren worked at the KCC before we hired him, so he's really our eyes and ears on all of the tariffs that we fight for on your behalf to keep at a reasonable level. So Darren does a really good job with rate studies, and he's doing a lot more, not only rate studies, but capital outlay plans, or, hey, my rates, I need to do this, or we have these X many projects, what do my rates need to be over the next 3 years to pay for those projects? So we're doing a lot more of that capital planning work, and Darren does a really good job with that. So if you ever need any more work done, don't be afraid to give us a buzz. So. And by the way, all this stuff is free for being a member. You don't pay Darren to come out and do a rate study. Where a normal rate study, as these guys know, would probably be $20,000
Mhm.
if you contracted that out.
Awesome.
So. The entrance would be paid for though.
Oh, I thought maybe we could catch him in that later, but I just.
They hold a raffle at their annual meeting. One city gets a free entry.
Yeah.
The Mid-States group, they are a fee-based.
It's cost-based.
Yeah.
He's nonprofit, we're all nonprofit, so that's cost-based.
Do you-
Two members of KDA, which interesting enough, the last couple of members we joined have been because they weren't able to use Mid-States.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we don't supply them, we don't do any power supply planning, they just want it, you've gotta be a member to use them. The rate is that you can, I shouldn't say that, we can work for you if you're municipal, the rate is different if you're not a member, and it quickly pays for itself if you're a member. So we've added quite a few members because of that.
Does Mid-States, or do you recommend cities to have an overall master plan for power, once you have a power department and a power plant? Does Mid-States Engineering assist in those type of plans, or is that regular or not regular?
I think but here's a few things.
I know that's too broad a question.
No, I think it's a really good question. I think a lot of cities probably don't, when they probably should. And yes, Mid-States can help put a strategic plan together, say over the next 20 years. And we can work with staff and council and go, hey, this is how we want to go, what's it kind of cost, and what things do we need to build into that plan?
Because Dustin mentions, various things, and we have a good understanding, but it's trying to get that piece to be able to communicate to the public, because they see the generation, that's great, but there's a whole other bag of stuff with obviously maintaining the distribution as well as the production, as well as the transmission line to get here. All those different factors together need to be part of it, and a lot of it's going to come due, obviously, at the same time, just like the other utilities, it gets hard to try to maintain it.
Yep.
But then it's, okay, how do you prioritize what's the most important part for your system, and which set of years should you try to accomplish that?
Yeah, Mike and his team can absolutely accomplish that. And actually Dan, who works for Mike, Dan White, does a maintenance program primarily on like substation maintenance. So they can segment it down even a little further and do, I think it's a fee base, so most of them are around $8,000 to $10,000. He can put a 1 through 5 year plan for like substation maintenance together.
We have.
And you've got
We have a
that.
maintenance program.
Okay, I was thinking you did.
Yeah, we were one of the first.
Yeah, so that's a start to where you guys can go, okay, here's what we need to maintain, here's the top priorities that Dan is saying, this really needs to be done in this substation. So that's a start, but yeah, we can help with kind of an overall, more global picture at here. Whether it's, we add in power supply, your power plants, you know, other power resources.
Right.
Any of that stuff, yeah. Actually, we're doing one for a city in central Kansas right now. You know, it'll be 6, 8, 10 page guidebook that kind of lays out some of the stuff.
Sure.
KMEA and Midstates, before they were KMEA, just Midstates built our new substation north of the power plant. That happened after that accident with the number 1 and number 2 feeder going up in that brick building that used to house all of our breakers. So that was built, and those guys were called, I think, 2:15 in the morning every year. So they were called that night. So I mean, that's the kind of response you get from them. I mean, I can't say enough about Mike and his crew. In the addition of Dan, just Dave, because there's stuff that we don't see. Dan worked for Evergy.
Yep.
And was a substation, I think, maintenance tech, and bringing him on, he sees stuff we don't see.
Or has had experience with issues that maybe you haven't came across yet, but he's seeing signs.
Right, yeah.
Hey, this-
Recognize early things that are
or-
happening.
Or that piece of equipment will eventually give you problems, we need to get that thing replaced, or, yeah, he's been fantastic for our communities. That guy's a road warrior, people want him all over the state, so, good questions. Something we're doing since, the IRA bill and the IIJA bill and all the other money that seems to be trying to roll out. We are doing webinars with a consultant that we hired out of DC to try and track federal funding for communities like you, whether it's on electric, but she does have some offerings for water, sewer, other resources. We've partnered with KMU and KPP, and we'll get into who they are in a little bit, but to try to help figure out all those programs. So it's been a bit challenging and frustrating, but I think unfortunately the federal government is trying to figure out what they're doing with all that money as they roll out the programs too. So
They announced it before they knew how it was gonna work.
yeah, I think they said, hey, we're gonna give all this money out, and then we're going, oh, what are the rules?
Yeah.
So we're trying to figure out ways that our organization, because again, a lot of our communities are really small and don't have the resources to write the grant, research the grant, figure out what needs to go in the grant. You know, how can KMEA be more of a conduit for maybe multiple cities in one grant opportunity? Or so we're trying to figure that out. It might not be year 1, but a lot of these programs are a 5-year cycle. So maybe on the year 2, 3, 4, we can capture a lot of dollars. So this is where I'm going to let Tom take over, and I'm going to sit down.
I'm going to introduce myself first. My name is Tom Saida, and I've worked for KMEA for probably around 12 years, and I'm the operational director at KMEA. And I have I'm in a group, and we have 6 schedulers who schedule our energy and interface with Southwest Power Pool, and also interface with Sunflower Electric and Evergy to communicate what generation's online. And we also price out our generation every day and send cities, the cost of what their generation will be. The cities that are registered in the market, the units, the generation that's registered in the market, we submit information to Southwest Power Pool so that they can dispatch that those units economically. So that's what kind of the group that I'm in, that we do. I want to back up for 1 second to a question that you asked about a master plan, because I really like that question a lot. So on a master plan, so one thing we looked at when Tyson mentioned that we looked at putting in these diesel units, these Caterpillars at some of these cities, that came directly from a kind of a look back after that February event a couple of years ago. We looked back and just kind of did a self-reflection of what cities really needed to compete in the forward market, to really compete. When you all put your generation in, you say you have a 1938 unit, and you have units that basically were put in so that your city could generate all the electricity for your entire city around the clock. You probably got 10 operators or some, an ungodly, you had an amount of operators so that you could supply all your electricity around the clock. You were a base load plant that was on all the time, and you needed a high level of expertise to be able to operate that. Really going forward, if you go to some of our smaller cities, they're struggling to have that level of expertise. It's just very difficult to have that level of expertise. A lot of them still have the type of units that we're talking about that were old base load units, that really is not what's needed in the current market design. With the way everything is interconnected together really calls for a technology change for some of those utilities. And the technology that we looked at multiple different things that we could do. We came up, we said these diesel generators are the cheapest incremental capacity that you can put in service. They do not have a natural gas issue in case natural gas goes out for you. And you could fire them up in a 10-minute or less. You could fire them up and cover full load on them. They're easy to operate and don't quite take the same expertise that you have and that your plant has. And they're not really what you would ever want to run for 24 days straight. I would not want to run those for 24 days straight. But would I be able to run them for 3 days straight? Absolutely. Would I be able to run them for a day and a half if I have an outage on a distribution line feeding my city? Absolutely. So that's why that generation was chosen, because it's at most, I shouldn't say cheap. It's the most economic generation you could put in. It has the best characteristics for able to be able to come online easy, and it was easy to operate, and you didn't need the high level of expertise to operate. So it was a technology change from where we are right now. I don't want to speak for what Colby's doing, but when they're putting in a series of diesel units, I'm thinking to myself, they're thinking ahead that they need a technology change, because they're saying, hey, I got some old units that I don't want to necessarily invest $2 million in that one to do something to it 5 years from now when something goes wrong. I want to start converting to a different. I want to go long term and start looking at a forward thing. So, great. I think that's what you were getting at when you were talking about kind of a bigger picture of what you would look to do.
Well, and it's not just the generation, but it's the substations, and
Yes.
if we need to locate a new substation somewhere.
Absolutely.
Or how to feed it without substations, those type of things. That questions come up, it would be better to have, instead of just concentrating, well, we have a problem in this, how many block area, what is the best for the system overall in the city? And then be able to communicate that both to the commissioners and to the public. That's what we're planning to do.
Makes sense. So on the eastern part of the state, I've got a city, we have a city, a fairly large city on the eastern part of the state. They're looking at getting another interconnection. So instead of buying, they have some generation in their city, can't cover but maybe half of their total load. That's not necessarily their concern. They're more concerned about if they take care of the interconnection, have a second interconnection, they don't necessarily have to worry about getting disconnected from the grid, because, so that's an investment they were willing to make for similar reasons to what you're talking about, how you might put a substation instead of different things. So every city's a little bit different on what they would need on a long-term plan and what they would look for doing.
Right.
So, absolutely. So, this is not me. This is Neil Daner, and Neil Daney is our person internally who negotiates and looks forward and looks for contracts to help us provide a portfolio of capacity contracts for our cities. So he helps negotiate those contracts. There's the power plant that you can't see it, but the power plant there, that's Dogwood Energy Center, which is a combined cycle power plant. It's a 634 megawatt gas power plant that has like a 7.2 heat rate. So fairly economic heat rate, you're talking about, your units are probably 9.5, 10 heat rate, somewhere in there. So this gets dispatched all the time. We own 62 megawatts of it. And when I say we own 62 megawatts of it, we have 5 cities that bought 62 megawatts of that plant. We have WAPA allocations, you have a WAPA allocation. That's a federal hydro product. Cheap capacity and cheap energy, federally cost-based, not market-based, cost-based, just a good product. I think that goes to 2054. So that is a long-term piece of your portfolio that you don't ever have to worry about supplying energy for your city. There's also SPA, and we have Buckeye, and we have Marshall, which are both wind farms that we have a piece of those that we purchased. We've been negotiating with a solar developer that is putting in a 250 megawatt solar farm that we think our cities have probably around 50 to 75 megawatts of interest that might buy a piece of those solar things. So he negotiates with the different developers and the different projects out there to bring opportunities to our cities.
So when you say, like the one where it said like 5 cities bought in 65 megawatts or whatever, so you're not necessarily buying in general just for transmission for everybody. It's just those specific cities that buy into those specific plans.
That's a great start, project-based. So every city has ultimate responsibility for the portfolio of capacity resources and energy resources that you have. We don't socialize between our cities. So we have some cities that have a lot of generation and some cities that buy a lot of capacity on the market and buy different projects here. We will show these type projects to everybody, but in reality, that if you look at Janison on the end, one city, that's the city of Garden City, there's 3 turbines there, 3 and 27 megawatts. That's a project of one city. When we're talking about these diesel units that we're looking at building, those will be projects of individual cities, because those individual cities will pay the entire cost of that project. Marshall Wind Farm, 4 cities bought 7 megawatts of a wind farm in northeastern Kansas. It's going to our EP1 group. 4 cities within our EP1 group is made up of 7 cities, but 4 of those cities said, hey, we would like to buy a piece of that. So they all bought a piece of that.
So how does the city make up their mind about what project they want to buy into? Is it just the values they want to? I want to stay green. The city wants to stay green, so we're just going to go all solar.
Let's just say green, but I'll be honest with you, none of our other cities, the green is the issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's 100% economic on.
So whatever project's cheapest for
Like I said, we
them.
have one city that would like to have a green footprint, and that's a wonderful thing to do. If you do it. I'm going to say all the other decisions that were made weren't because of that. They were because of straight economics.
Mm.
And us at KMEA, and he mentioned Darren earlier, who does rate studies for folks. So when I'm looking at it, and Jerry and I are putting together a plan to put in some diesel units at a city, we're coming up with what we believe the costs are. He's looking at it and looking what the forward costs are and looking what the rates would have to be to support that. I'd like to tell you we do that on every single thing out there. To some extent, we do that on every single thing out there. Some things it's not quite that detailed that you need that kind of information to make a decision, but in other things it's just required. So yes, we would be telling you, we'd be advising you on what would be a good idea.
Gotcha.
And some of it depends on how much need you have at the time that, say, a Buckeye Wind Farm, hey, we've got an opportunity to buy a chunk of Buckeye Wind Farm. Well, some cities might need more capacity or more energy at that time, and some cities might be full. They don't need to take anything. So some of it's timing, and some of it's, like Tom said, economics or green driven. I mean, that's the beauty of the way we're set up, is every city can pick and choose. You know.
What's important to them?
Yeah, if green is important to you, well, you need to look at some of the green energies. So it's really individual.
Does proximity to where the project is located, come into the equation?
No, yes. At times, always take it, we're gonna look at whether deliverability is possible. So we would look and do some studies internally to say, is deliverability possible? Now, to be honest, Dogwood is in Missouri. It's all the way in Missouri, and we're taking delivery all the way out in Garden City. So it's about as far away as you're gonna get on that type of resource. But if you look at like the Marshall Wind Farm, the reason why we suggested that to our EMP1 group, and we did not suggest it strongly to our EMP2 or EMP3 group, is because of proximity. So really, it's both. It's both, because we thought delivery on that issue would have been an issue coming this far south for that intermittent, non-dispatchable
Production source, yeah.
wind resource. And we thought that dispatch would be difficult, so we didn't recommend it to come this far west, whereas the Dogwood, it was able to make it.
So there's lots of variabilities from project to project.
Absolutely, 100%. There's a lot of variabilities from project to project.
And like Buckeye's a wind resource north of Hayes.
Yes.
And we've got cities almost in every section of the state.
It's kind of more centrally located than Buckeye, or than Marshall. So it was one that we marketed, we showed it to all our cities to pick up. And some of them didn't, some of them didn't.
So just curious, why is Eudora in the group by itself?
It's a good question. They are a single project, because they wanted to be a single project. Taking a step back, most of our cities, we like to see about, on capacity, you need to cover your entire capacity plus reserves. But on energy, we like to have firm energy bought for maybe 2/3 of your load. We don't cover 100% of your load on firm energy, because there's just gonna be times when the market is, tomorrow is negative all day, by the way. It's negative all day tomorrow. So you're gonna.
No, that's, never mind.
Not for you. But we're talking our project-based system. So it gives you an opportunity to buy in, and also, there's so much variability in what your loads are from top to bottom. It's really hard to cover it in. That city had a consultant that wanted to cover 100% of the load.
Okay.
And so it was an honest opinion of how to do it. And quite frankly, if you look at during that February event, they did very well. They covered in their entire load at like $42. Couldn't really beat that number. A lot of days when it's not as good a deal, but you buy something over a 10-year period, you know there's gonna be highs and lows. It's worked out very well for that project.
So each one of those EMP, EMP2, they're all negotiating their rates together, is that what they're
No.
doing?
Yeah, but that's good, it's a good question. So this is, I have to go back now. So EMP 1, 2, and 3. EMP 1 has 7 different cities in it. EMP 2 has somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 or 16 cities. EMP 3 has around 21 cities. So what we've done is we've aggregated the city's loads. So we aggregate their loads into one delivery location to supply that load. Still, within those cities, each individual cities, like on that, if we go back to that Marshall wind product, Baldwin City bought 2.5 megawatts of it. Garnett said, I want 1 megawatts of it. Gardner bought 2.5 megawatts. Ottawa bought 1. I might have those two flipped. But Osawatomie said, you know what, I don't want to buy any of that. And Pomona and Prescott were both very small cities. Like Prescott is like a 300 kW city. We didn't think it was a reasonable purchase for them to buy any of that. So really, those last 3 cities didn't buy any of that product. Each of those cities made the decisions on their own with advice from us, consulting from us, on whether they wanted to participate in those projects. So, and that's the way we do. All these projects are exactly the same way. There's 23 cities bought Buckeye. If you look at this, I have somewhere in the 40s type cities here. We showed it to every one of them, and we said, hey, this is what we have here. Some of them, well, most of them we recommended it for. A lot of them, a few of them we did not. And we recommended certain, we might have said, I think we went to Ottawa and we said, you know what, 5 megawatts is the perfect amount of Buckeye for you. And they said, we want 8. So we said, okay, we'll give you 8. So they bought 8. So it's really up to individual cities to make that final decision, but we will advise and we'll show you cost estimates, we'll show you what your rates are doing, we'll show you what, the best information we can. But deep down, each individual city might have a different personality about what they really, really want to do. So, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
So when each of these cities are setting their rates, they have a different portfolio, each one of them has a different portfolio of generation, each one. And the numbers are calculated hourly, based on what their individual loads are hourly, and what each of those resources are doing. And there's actually other resources, there's other products that we have. We have some energy-only products with a couple of different vendors that we're getting delivered over, and those contracts range from 2 years to 10 years on those energy-only products. And some of them are on peak, 5x16, just on peak hours of the day during the week. Some of them are 24 hours a day. Some of them are on peak 7 days a week. All kinds of different products, depending on what the city needs and what they want. And we'll do whatever the city wants in the end.
We were originally approached years ago to become a member of EMP two. Mary, you probably studied on that.
And that was a long time ago, and Sharon Springs did end up joining, and your city and another city did not. I'll be honest with you, if I'm going back and thinking about it, we didn't have a lot of resources to offer them, and we were not as dynamic of an agency as we are right now. We have a lot more resources to offer people.
That's probably a dumb question, but how do you decide what EMP the city goes into when they negotiate with you?
You've had some very good questions.
Okay, so.
Well, we're out of questions now, I want to ask you.
Jason's buddy's quote.
Yeah.
Each of those Southwest Power Pool has collapsed control areas. So Sunflower, it was a former control area. West Star was a former control area. KCP&L was a control. They've collapsed all those control areas into Southwest Power Pool, one large control area. They still have reliability regions, which are basically those regions. So if you go back to those cities, if you look at EMP 2, the thing that all of these cities have in common, they're all in Sunflower. If you look at this group, I would say they're not quite all in there. I think there's 3 of them that are not in West Star, but one of them is in Western Farmers, which is kind of in Oklahoma. Somehow they reached up into Kansas. One of them is in Empire District, which is Liberty Utilities, which reached in from Missouri to grab one of those cities. And the third one, I believe was, I don't remember what it might have been Midwest Energy. But that's basically the reason we would have, so you would be in EMP 2 group. And there's nothing real magical about it. I'd love to tell you there's something more magical than that. That's how we made those decisions.
Gotcha.
When you put them into a delivery load area, you have to do a delivery point transfer to subtract the load from one provider to another. And that provider EMP2 has one aggregate load. SPP will analyze whether that can happen and if any transmission upgrades need to be made. You technically could apply to put you in any one of them, but the opportunity, just like the answer that you gave earlier to you, proximity means something, so we chose to go proximity when we put them together.
Am I free to go now?
We're not holding you against your will, I mean,
I thought you
walk
said
away.
that's the
I'm gonna talk about something that's not on that presentation right now. So there are other energy agencies in the state of Kansas. There's KPP, Kansas Power Pool, which is a very good energy agency. There's no criticism here at all. We are project-based, they are not. They will buy, their projects aren't the same projects that we would have, but they might buy a piece of a wind farm, and they probably have a piece of dogwood, and or they have Wappa, they have whatever else, and they have some, and cities have some internal generation. They throw all the energy into a bucket, crank it all up, and everybody pays the exact same price per megawatt. So they use a different model than what we use. Both models are used throughout the United States in different agencies. So our model is project-based. Their model is not project-based. It's the other. It's called a type pool because they have like a 30-year, everybody in that pool has signed like 30-year contracts for delivery for 30 years. And then they have the obligation, and they're a nonprofit also, to come to the table with whatever resources to serve that load as economically and reliably as possible, and everyone pays the same. We have the contracts, and even though all the projects are, every utility has contracts in place for the terms of those contracts. So we'll have a contract with GRDA, and then we have 28 cities with back-to-back contracts that look exactly like our contract. So they're paying for the whole term. But as far as being part of the E&P has a 3-year out provision. So for what that's worth, it's not, I don't think that's a critical piece of information, but there's a 3-year out provision on that E&P. We don't hold people hostage. There's just no real reason to. But the projects they're a member of, they would have an obligation for the project, and they would still receive it. So,
This might be a Dustin question, but do you know what model Sunflower uses?
Not in the trash can.
I just say great.
That's what I policies, all of the cost goes in, and it just gets mixed up and we get.
And it is.
Gotcha.
They can't tell you what
Yeah,
you're.
We pay what every other Sunflower city pays. And when's our contract up?
No, soon.
26.
2026.
So I have a question then. When I first started in the city, Larry used to purchase power from the Nebraska
Yeah.
power pool. So why would he go to Nebraska when he has this here? I guess I'm just trying to figure that out, because I never understood why we bought it from Nebraska.
Circumstances of the time, I
That's who we
imagine.
currently have it
but-
with, is Nebraska?
No, that was
No,
when I
here's
first
Sunflower.
started.
Oh, gotcha, so Sunflower, okay.
And that was a totally different market back then too, Mary.
So back then, everything was transacted on a point-to-point basis from one point to another. You didn't have an overlying pool that hindered the transmission of anything.
Okay.
And aggregated all the transmission and say, I can deliver from here to here. You actually transacted across specific transmission lines. So that would have been in your red road, would have been the transmission line that was built. And the only reason I know it is because it's a problem child, that transmission line. And it goes up and from Nebraska straight down here.
Okay.
And it delivers all the way down to, Sunflower takes delivery of it also. It goes all the way in dead ends to Sunflower.
Cause that starts at Sutherland, don't it?
Is that where it starts?
I think so.
It comes out of that.
Yeah.
But-
Coal
so-
plant up there, yep.
But that, the way, that's the reason why we probably bought, or they bought, whoever it was bought from Nebraska, is because they got transmission on that transmission line, and they were able to go to a resource up there, probably a coal resource, quite frankly, and they were able to jump on that coal resource and get delivery on that line.
I just never understood it, that makes sense now.
Yeah, that's, and to be honest with you, we've come a long way, baby. That system is gone, thank goodness, because that is.
Everything's better.
That is a.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
I like how this meeting's
Yep.
It's ready to go in the right direction.
So I'm gonna now jump back on this if I want, but please keep questions going. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the Sunflower model in a bit. So, cause I break down, I have a couple slides that break down, we have a couple slides that break down what happened during that February event and why your costs were what they were and kind of what advantages and disadvantages of the couple models that are out there.
I'm really raising the hair on my neck.
Yeah.
So responsibilities. FERC, you've all heard of FERC, you've heard the KCC, the Kansas Corporation Commission, you've heard of NERC, you've heard of Southwest Power Pool, and then Joint Action Agencies. So the state agency, obviously Kansas Power Pool, SPP is an RTO, or an ISO, Independent System Operator, or a Regional Transmission Operator. I believe that's right. So in any case, FERC comes up with the overarching policies and decides, hey, we want everyone to have access to transmission service. Everyone should have access to transmission service. We think there should be a big market. Is it a question?
Nope, just scratching my
We think there should be an overlying market involved here too. So they come up with those type policies. The state agency, they come through and they basically monitor and control the IOU. So your Kansas City Power Light, Evergy type people, those companies, investor-owned utilities that have a monopoly. So the Kansas Corporation Commission, they they're the control mechanism to make sure that the monopoly doesn't take advantage of everybody. They also, they get involved a little bit with municipals as it relates to like territorial type issues. By and large, Sunflower is not, their rates are not controlled by the KCC, but some of their transmission is because other folks buy that transmission that are not within their rate structure. So you buy not just a bulk electric system, are you on the low voltage or high voltage?
We're on the low one.
Okay, so you're paying a wholesale distribution charge also, you're paying a delivery charge also on the low voltage as well as the bulk electric system. Probably, it might be lumped together in one number.
You're on the low voltage? The 115.
Oh, that's
Oh,
That is low.
That's 345.
Oh, that is.
No, anything over 34.
34. Yeah, but, okay, so you're not paying that lower,
No.
that thing, you're still paying the bulk, but in any case, so you would have, they'd have some reach into what goes on here with that transmission at the KCC, but by and large, they don't really do much with yourself or with Sunflower. NERC comes up with policies as it relates to reliability. So they're gonna come up with a policy that says you need to test the batteries in your substation twice a year. You need to, there are a lot of overarching things. You need to test, you need to do studies on your transmission system, high voltage transmission system, to ensure reliability. They're gonna come up with a lot of those type policies, and they're gonna have the ability to levy penalties. Now, they don't control much of what you do, because you, one, have to be a utility greater than 75 megawatts, or have a generator greater than 20 megawatts. So you're not, aggregate you may have 20, right? You don't, but aggregate the city could have 20, but we're talking individual generators gotta be over 20. So it doesn't control you. To be honest with you, Garden City just went over 75 megawatts this year, but they're like 75.6. So they jumped into, and there's a couple of criteria that NERC has to address for them, of which we're gonna help them out taking care of that. Southwest Power Pool is that market. They're that entity that does studies to determine what transmission needs to be built, as well as controlling a market design so that everyone has access to the transmission service and that we dispatch the most economical generation within the whole footprint. So Sunflower is an off-taker of what SPP is doing, Southwest Power Pool is doing, as we are too. I mentioned earlier, the group that I'm in submits to Southwest Power Pool information every day. We estimate every one of our city's loads. We aggregate them together into those 3 or 4 buckets that we show you if you want to Community North. And then we submit that to Southwest Power Pool where our loads are. And we also show them what generation we have available, what is there. And we give them prices on it so that they can put it in their stack and decide to generate, to dispatch it or not. And that is registered generation. Yours, we have about a third of our generation we have is registered, about 2/3 is not registered. A lot of your kind of stuff would not necessarily be registered. Southwest Power Pool is the region on the right, that big red region on the right, goes up to Canada and down to Texas. And I believe there's in the neighborhood of 13 states involved. That Southwest Power Pool has one market for the entire group. It's over 50, I think I have a slide in here that says they hit 53,000 megawatts of load, of total load. There's somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 62,000 megawatts of installed capacity to cover that load. So Southwest Power Pool is analyzing what generation should be dispatched to most economically cover the load on an hourly and daily basis. That's the end of that section. Now we get to the fun part, more fun part. This is another take a step back type thing. You have your generation, and then if you kind of look through here, generally speaking, your generation, and then you have high voltage transmission, which is network integrated transmission service. It's probably on your bill as either NITS or transmission. And that's the portion of your bill that you're paying on transmission. And then you have low voltage transmission, or low voltage transmission, or even distribution that is going from them to you. On some of our cities, that leg right there on the low voltage side is owned by either Sunflower or Westar or Midwest Energy, and they're paying a fee to go across that section of it. You're paying this bulk electric system, and then you're also paying another fee on this one. if you're taking it off of the 115, you're not paying that piece. Now, you actually have some generation back here, behind the meter is what we would refer to it as, and so you're not actually using the bulk electric system for that. You still need to buy that transmission to cover your entire load. This kind of breaks down what I just said. Capacity, transmission, and energy is kind of the new piece. So you have your capacity and your energy, capacity and your transmission, and then the energy component of it is really different than those two. Generally speaking, if you go historically, and I've been doing this since like 1989, so if you go historically, it used to be about a third on cost. So your energy component was only about a third of your cost. Your demand or capacity component was about a third of your cost, and your transmission was about a third of your cost. I've got some more slides that are going to explain some of that in a couple minutes, but this is the slides I was talking about earlier, where it kind of breaks down the difference of what Sunflower does compared to what we do. So we are project-based, and this is during that February event, which how many of you were here during that February event? Okay, you saw prices go through the roof. On a daily basis, the real-time prices were over $2,000 per hour per megawatt. They were really, really high. Because we're project-based, each of our individual cities didn't socialize another city. So we had a range of outputs in our group. The cities with internal generation that ran, and we had multiple cities with internal generation that ran. By and large, they all ran their diesel generation behind the meter. Most of those units are dual fuel. I'm assuming you have some dual fuel?
Yes.
Okay. Most of those units are dual fuel. They weren't able to run on natural gas because you can get natural gas to your plant. So you could get diesel fuel, and you probably had diesel coming in every other day to cover your needs. Something like that. So in any case, the cities with the internal generation, they ran their generation, their diesel generation, and they ran it. It usually cost around maybe $200 to $300 a megawatt. It was probably costing you per megawatt that you were generating, which is really, really high for what you're selling it for. However, it's a lot lower than where the market was. The market was over $2,000, like I said. A lot of those cities, and probably about a third of our cities, actually made money during that event because they ran their generation and they either ran more than what their load was, or some of those projects that we talked about earlier were being injected into the market. Even though they were fixed price products, they were injected into the market at higher prices while they were covering their load at that $250 to $300. So those cities did very, very well. And like I said, that's probably about a third of our cities. Then we had another third of our cities that did not have internal generation. And they basically were covered with capacity contracts and energy contracts, which, if you think about what I said earlier, about 2/3 of what their load was is what we would normally try to cover with fixed price energy contracts. We wouldn't want to cover the whole thing because you would get jammed a lot of times. Well, in this particular case, those cities were buying $2,000 of megawatt energy for a third of their load. So we had some cities that paid, I think we had one city that paid $10 million because they were exposed. And that was our largest city, was exposed to a big chunk of energy, and that city could not run their gas generation because it was not dual fuel. So they couldn't run their generation, and they were stuck with buying expensive power, so they got a huge bill. And so that's what happened to them. So when I say we had a range of outputs, we truly did have a range of outputs. Everyone in KMEA didn't do great, but everyone did not do poorly. I mean, we think our project-based system worked the way it was designed, which is why we took a step back and said, okay, guys, you need to build generation. This is why we're showing you generation. One of the cities that did not have generation, that I believe had about a $1.2 million bill, they're putting in 4 generators. That's what they're covering their load with generators, because they do not want it to happen again. They were taking the matter in their hands, and they're saying we're going to do it. So that is the second project that we're doing. This is the system-based products. You have a system-based product. Your cost on your Sunflower is system-based. It's total dependent on their system cost. So if I have a line here that I want to read because I truly believe it. Cities which contract contract for their entire load, and system, contracting cities get both the benefit or detriment of the portfolio of resources that were available during that event. So, I'll be honest with you, if Sunflower had all their units online, and their coal unit was able to produce 100%, and they were getting all kinds of wind, and they were getting all kinds of, and they had some cheap gas bought for their system, they could have had a cheap price on their numbers. I just don't wanna, I'm not here to tell you one product is the absolute only way to skin a cat, because I would be lying to you. A system-based product can work, but it also sometimes doesn't work. So you get both the decrement and advantage of that portfolio generation that was available on that day, because they looked at what was available and they just calculated what their cost was, and then you got the system average for that entire month. The pieces that, I highlighted 3 examples here. Say a city has an industry that curtailed during that event, and so their load was 25% less. Didn't really matter that they curtailed, because your costs are still system average based on that load. Matter of fact, you could have you could have disconnected from them and put all your residents, if you didn't have generation, put all your residents out of lights for the whole period of time. It wouldn't have made any difference. Your system average for your energy would have still been $250, $300 a megawatt for the month, because they calculate system average on monthly cost, not on an hourly or individual. So when I told you about my project base, we're calculating hourly what the costs are, and there's no socialization. This is a different model. This is actually, quite frankly, closer to like KPP's model, where they look at their entire monthly cost, and they put it in the bucket, turn it up, and everyone pays the same rate. So that's that example. The second example, I believe, would be you. You sell your capacity to Sunflower, and they ran the they gave you direction on what to run that generation for. And even though at times you're probably covering your load during the highest prices of the day, didn't matter. Your cost went into their bucket, and you paid the system average for your entire month, regardless of you supplying your load during that period of time. Now, the other model that I believe Sunflower may have some people have is if, say, they did not sell their capacity to Sunflower. So you still do a deal with Sunflower, but you're not selling your capacity to them. It's your capacity. So you self-direct and decide to, that event happens again, you self-direct and decide to serve your entire load. You disconnect from Sunflower, the day prices get to $500, and you run your generation for 4 days, and you reconnect later on. It doesn't really matter, because you're paying their system average for that month, and their costs are still gonna be $250 a megawatt for that month. So even though you displaced the highest prices of that month, they would make no difference. And I think we had both those issues going on with different cities where we answered some questions about it. So with that, does that answer of what their system is compared to our system? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it
And once
does.
again, I really, you get both the detriment and the benefit of their portfolio. And there are times when having a big coal unit is a benefit to you. But there are also times when there's so much wind in the marketplace, and all day tomorrow it's going to be negative prices, which is what the case is. I believe our EMP2 group average, what did I tell you, negative $11 for the day.
14 something, yeah.
Garden City, yeah,
Garden City was
between the two, one was negative 14 and one was negative $11 average for the entire day.
So they're paying you to take energy.
They're paying you to take energy. That's just, so a coal unit doesn't help you in that regard, is what I'm kind of getting at there, because they usually have a minimum run on them, that they usually have to run like 50% of their nameplate. They can't just come offline and then come back on a day later without a lot of work. So they usually run a minimum, and then they ramp up when the price is really high. So when the price is negative $11 or negative $14, they're still running at 200 megawatts and $35 a megawatt or whatever the coal unit costs. So both good and bad.
If I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that since we're on Sunflower and are contracted to have to turn our power plant on here locally anytime they ask, even though we turned it on during the February event, it didn't help us at all.
I'm going to tell you, it helped you in that you might have lowered Sunflower's overall cost from $251 a megawatt for the month.
So we helped
to
everybody else, but not us.
$250.5 a megawatt.
Well, us.
In concert,
Yeah,
everybody,
yeah,
it got
everybody.
watered down with everyone else. It got watered down with everyone else. I mean, but that's what that product is. I mean, it's a system average product, and that's the way it's designed to work.
Let me just go on record saying that sucks.
Sucks.
Yeah, it really sucked that month, let me tell you.
I don't disagree with you, but I'm trying to be as, I mean, I'm
Sure.
trying to give you
Yeah.
to understand what it is, and I think you understand it. But we looked at it for a while before, because we started getting some of our cities showed us the bill, and what's going on here? And then it kind of clicked, oh, that's exactly the way they would apply it. It makes sense. I don't think there's anything nefarious on how they did it that day. I think that's exactly the same way it works.
That's the standard operating
That's
procedure.
standard operating
That's what we
procedure.
agreed
They
to.
don't really have a mechanism to do a contract.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we agreed to.
Right.
You have a monthly average value, what do you sign that?
Yeah.
And it could help you sometimes, and then I'm sure if you look at the 10-year contract, there's gonna be a month where you said, man, that was good. I just, I wanna tell you, well. Okay, so, I'll move it on. Capacity. So, you need to have enough capacity to cover your entire load plus 15% planning reserve margin. That's over and above what your peak load is for that month. That used to be 12%, moved up to 15% here June 1. They moved to 15%, and I'll be honest with you, it's probably gonna continue to go up.
It's gonna go to 20 probably.
It easily could go to 20. It easily could go to 20. There's things going on and within SPP that they're really concerned about integrating all the wind that's in the footprint. There's a lot of wind in the footprint. They're intimidated about the solar that's gonna be in the footprint going forward when we get there. And so that is, it's something that the only hammer they have is to increase the planning reserve market, to force people to bring more capacity to the table. So might be something that's required of you. To the extent embedded within your contract, you don't pay for planning reserve margin independently. It's included in your capacity cost. So they went up from 12% to 15%. I doubt you specifically noticed a cost adjustment just because they're now having to cover 3% more reserves for your load. I doubt it. Maybe they have a mechanism to add it back into your capacity cost. I don't really know the answer to that. But you're not necessarily paying for that extra 3% capacity margin that they have. And the good thing is they probably have a little bit of excess right now, so it's probably not really costing a lot. But for your generation, generally it's tested every year. You have to do an accreditation test on a 5-year basis, and then you have to do an operational test on a yearly basis during the summer season. That summer season is actually changing to where it doesn't necessarily be in the summer season, but that hasn't been totally approved yet, so I would still do it during the summer season, I'm sure you have. Does that, I mean, that kind of and you're selling your capacity to Sunflower, so do they have to witness the test? Or do you just do it and give them?
They have been here. I don't think they've been here the last 2 years. I think during COVID.
They didn't.
Don't think
They're probably asking for your performance and your availability now. Are they asking for weekly availability or monthly, or how are they getting it from you?
it's not.
They're giving monthly availability. So within Southwest Power Pool, I told you they're very nervous about capacity, and the only thing they really do is they can increase the planning reserve margin to make you cover more capacity. Not quite true. They could also put in some limitations on your capacity, saying you're giving them your availability, and Sunflower is asking for that, not because they really want it. They're asking for it because SPP is asking for it. They want to know your monthly and daily availability, so that they can calculate a total efficient to multiply by that accredited capacity value. So your accredited capacity may have been, you said 16-ish megawatts of capacity, which is very close to like the installed number. That's that number. Going forward, if you say a unit was out of service for 3 of the 4 months during the summer season, that would change you were only available 25% of the time. You take a 5-year average and throw out the worst year, and that would be your So that might, if you had 5 years where you were only available 25% of the time, then your new capacity value would be 25% of that accredited testing value. So it's caused a lot of hoopla within Southwest Power Pool, and I'll be quite frank with you, they've submitted things to FERC to approve those tariff changes that allows them to collect this information and apply those things. FERC has denied the last tariff change that would implement that, and they want something a little more conservative. They want something quicker and more conservative, so it can only get worse from what they think they want, but that hasn't been submitted yet, so.
What about winter testing?
That is gonna happen, not yet. Right now, if you do a test in the summertime and you're happy with your tested value in the summertime, you can claim that for the winter season also. If you're not happy with that number, then you would need to do a winter test also. There's also some different requirements if you're a winter peaking utility. And we have some, if you remember what SPP looks like, it goes all the way up close to the water. There's a lot of winter peaking utilities up there that require some winter testing. But right now, since most units test higher in the wintertime than in the summertime, because the cooling is not an issue, so most of them have a higher value in the winter season. If you test in the summer season, for us, which are a summer peaking utility, you're okay. So good question, and I wouldn't put it past them to put in testing for that season also. It would make sense, you could do it and require it, but they haven't done it yet.
With all of that, we feel the value of owning capacity is gonna just go up. There's less of it, they're demanding more of it.
Yeah.
So it becomes a supply and demand. The people who have it, there's gonna be people that are short and need to buy it through contracts. So the value of a power plant in the next 5 years we think is gonna become more valuable.
We've been, and I absolutely, so, I told you Neil Davies is the one who does our capacity contracts, negotiates. We have a GRDA product that a lot of our cities have a GRDA product. By the way, our GRDA product is a system-based product too. So it solved the same issue that you had with Sunflower. The only difference was we had cities that are, your size that may have had 1 megawatt of GRDA as one resource. So it did some funky things on cost, and so their cost went up for that month. But it is a system-based product. But that product, which we have about 60 megawatts of, 63 megawatts in our group, is expiring in May of 26. And so we're looking for capacity in the market. And what Neil has found is that the prices being offered, if you can even find it, are double what they are right now. So right now you can buy what's called paper capacity, which really doesn't have any intrinsic value other than it meets your obligation. And it's selling at maybe $225 a kW a month. So $2,250 a megawatt per month is what it's selling for. So he's getting quotes of $4.50 to $5, $6 for those forward years. So, and it's because everything that SPP is doing, integrating all the new wind, all the new intermittent resources, all the new planning user margin increases and performance-based accreditation implementations. It's got every utility saying, I'm not willing to sell my last megawatt at a cheap price. I'm just gonna hold on to it. I can't get it. So the prices are going up on those products, which is another reason why building the generation makes a lot of sense right now.
Or you having plenty of generation.
Or you having
It's gonna be a very, very key asset for you guys moving forward.
Capacity is bought with those, I mentioned those products, the GRDA, WAPA, SPA, and of course KMEA transfers between cities. So within our EFP groups, I mentioned some of our cities had generation and some did not. The ones that have excess generation are selling it to the cities that don't have it. So they're selling that excess capacity. That doesn't give them any intrinsic value if there's a February event, but it meets their capacity obligation. And so it optimizes our cities' excess capacity, and it also gives those cities that don't have capacity access to some cheap economic capacity. So that's what's been happening, that's how we treat the cities within a pool. That's one advantage for being in that pool.
So our current capacity, as it lands, do we have excess available?
Right now,
But we-
I mean, our load is continuing to rise.
Yeah,
We have about 12 megawatts of peak.
Last summer, we had
13 megawatts of peak load, and you have 16 megawatts. So, and you also have, one of the products I have here is WAPA. You actually have that WAPA, and that is a KMEA project that you're a participant of. I think you're getting in the neighborhood of 800,
a little less than that.
a little bit less, so about 800 kW. So that product by itself is probably, we kind of did a back of the napkin analysis, but because you have that product, you don't have to buy your capacity obligation that Sunflower is billing you for, because they're billing for your monthly capacity needs. You don't have to buy 800 kW less. So that product, with the cost of it compared to the cost you're paying for your Sunflower contract, is saving you probably 50 to 60 grand a year, just on that piece that we scheduled for you. So it's displacing some higher price capacity and energy you'd be buying from them.
But to your point, conceivably, if you were any EMP two, because you'll get some capacity with WAPA, so you'd have 16.8
Mhm.
megawatts of, you in theory could sell 3.8 megawatts to the EMP.
Well, you need reserves too, yes.
But in reserves, but anything excess, Tom can help you sell. that
Within
that
the group, we'll optimize your excess to the extent we can. If we have, if we have 10 megawatts of excess and we have 7 megawatts of need within the group, then we just pro rata split it out to everybody. So everyone gets a pro rata share of it, depending on what their excess was. That's the way we do it, in both our AP 1, 2, and 3 groups right now. But quite honestly, is what it's telling you is you're buying capacity at the same time you're selling some, but that capacity premium, like what you're paying to Sunflower, you wouldn't need to buy capacity to cover that. We would probably recommend for someone like you to buy an energy product, just not necessarily the capacity portion, because you're covered with that, but you need both capacity, energy, or capacity, transmission, and energy. Transmission is given based on what your load is, don't have any say so in that. And the capacity portion, you have enough internally to cover your load. The energy portion is what you want. And so you're not necessarily gonna wanna cover 100% of your energy needs, because you do have generators there to hedge any extreme conditions that could happen. So that extreme, if that extreme condition happens, you'll be able to cover your load with those. But, we would recommend covering a portion of it with energy contracts, like a solar contract. Solar is probably one of the more economic energy products you can buy. It has some capacity embedded with it, but it's basically an energy play and not a capacity play, quite frankly. Because you get less capacity, the energy is what you really buy. And the same with, quite honestly, wind. You can buy a wind product also, and it has both energy and capacity, but once again, it's really an energy play. It's something you're buying it to cover your energy. Anything you want to add on that, sir? Transmission, we already talked about kind of transmission. You're paying that network integrated transmission service based on your 12 monthly peak loads. So you look at your 12 peak loads for the month, and you correlate it with Sunflower's peak loads, and that's how we tell how much you're supposed to buy, and that's how SPP calculates how much you're supposed to buy, and then you pay that pro rata share based on Sunflower's transmission cost for their transmission system. So what the rate you pay for your transmission service is identical to the rate they're paying for their transmission service to cover their load. And that's based on what FERC said they had to do. That's kind of a FERC thing back 20 years ago they came up with. Because I'm talking too much at this point. So I talked about Southwest Power Pool and how they dispatch the system and how they come up with what the costs are. I showed you that whole area that is some 52,000 megawatts of load with 60-some thousand megawatts of generation, which is offered to the market. That's peak load. So on this specific day, this is all the generation that was offered to the market, stacked from high price to low price, from $0 up to, somewhere probably $60, somewhere in that range. the mark, actually, that's, actually, I apologize. This is the megawatts, this is the dollar value here. I apologize, I messed up. So the market got dispatched at $60. They just went over and they said, yep, we need that much generation, and they did this on an hourly basis. They said, we needed 39.9 gigawatts, which is 39,900 megawatts of generation to cover the load within the footprint. And so everything below the line got paid $60.49. At this same time, Dogwood, which was one of our projects, the price of gas was $8. That was this past summer. Price of gas was over $8. That unit for a 12-hour run was $68 of what it would have been. So it would have been right in here. It did not get dispatched by the market. So SPP sent us a dispatch, or would not have sent us a dispatch center signal. If I had something that was priced in the lower side, then I would have gotten a dispatch center at our office, and we would have called the city and said, you need to run from this hour to this hour. Just, this is something that we watch every day, and our operators watch every day. The red line is what the estimated load is on that's 7 contiguous days. And you can see that's a 30,000 megawatts up to 40,000 megawatts. So there's a lot of variability in the course of the day. Obviously in the night, loads are lower. So that's what the load is doing. The blue squiggly line on top of it's actuals on top of the forecast. This green line, that is wind. That's a forecast for wind production in Southwest Power Pool. Multiple periods of time where we have more wind production estimated to be generated than we have load. We have probably 25,000 megawatts of wind forecasted to be produced right there. That's when you get negative LPs. So I would have expected on this day to have negative prices.
Like tomorrow. Just like tomorrow, which is a pile of wind and no load because it's 60 degrees.
That's exactly what's going on. That's just one of the resources. That's just the wind resource. You also have coal units that have a minimum load that have to have a base load. You have nuclear units that have a minimum load, have a base load. Well, they have one load, top and bottom, so they don't have any variability underneath either. And then you have some run the river hydro that has to run. You have multiple resources that have to run, probably another 5,000–6,000 megawatts that have to run. So if you kind of move that up another 5,000 megawatts, you can see how much would need to be curtailed. And they routinely curtail that much. So that's why you see negative prices.
So curtailing, Tom, is they're
Telling someone to turn it off.
Turn it off. And a lot of ways they do that is they go negative. So they'll turn it off because it's no longer a financial gain. Now, with wind, so the federal government subsidizes wind by, I think it's $3. So in theory, they can go negative up to $3 and still be making
Something.
So that's why you start.
Up to how much?
I think it's $3. 25. Sorry.
For wind, it's crazy number.
And I get my megawatts and
No,
kilowatts
that's
all.
actually, that's exactly,
That's what
it
it
is.
is.
That's all it is. So the federal government pays like $25 a megawatt for every megawatt of wind produced to the developer or whoever owns it. Now, on the contracts that we have, we bought the energy component of it without that piece. The developer kept the tax credit and the production, it's called a production tax credit. They kept that production tax credit. So they kept it, lowered our price on our contracted rate. So like on Buckeye, we paid $14 average price. We paid $14 average price, but since they were getting a $25, so it probably cost $40 to build. That over the life of it, that's probably the true value of it's around $40, but the federal government's paying a big chunk of it. I'm gonna skip through here just a little bit quicker now. That is actually that's the same region, that shows flows within the region. So when Southwest Power Pool settles the market, I showed you that they settle it based on that stack of generation. There's also another input within it, which I didn't want to mention because it gets very confusing, but they also look at the congestion component that's going on. So there's going to be times when, if you look at that right there, there's going to be times when the price at this point is about $10. That's about $10. And down here, that's probably $80, because this is just a heat map that they have going 24 hours a day that you can look at. It's actually on the public site if you ever want to go to spp.com. But you can see on a real-time basis, they're settling over 1,200 points. And they're looking at the congestion and the flows that are going on at the same time they're looking at that, thank you. Sorry, I'm talking a little.
Oh, no, you're totally fine, thank you, appreciate it.
So they're looking at that congestion also. So that goes into what you said, proximity. Would you want it to be close? Generally speaking, it would be benefit you to be close, because it's gonna be injecting it pretty close to the same time you're withdrawing your load from the market. So you withdraw your load from the market at one price, you inject your resources at a different price, remote from your load. To the extent they're, on top of each other, you're injecting them at the same price. To the extent you have a WAPA allocation, that WAPA allocation is being injected up in Nebraska. Your load is down here, so they're injected, you're paying your bilateral rate, your contracted rate for that product. You're buying your load at where the load price is, they're injecting your resources at the injection price. So there's a lot of data flowing from into Southwest Power Pool and out of Southwest Power Pool prices. There is another product which we're not going to talk about a whole lot. We're talking about LMPs, locational marginal prices, which may be a term that you've heard or haven't, but it's made up of three components: energy, lossage, and congestion. That energy product, that energy portion, which is by far and away is the largest portion of that, is based on that stack. That's that stack. That is 100% the stack is that energy portion. There's also a little bit of lossage, which are probably fractional percentages, like less than 0.5%, and congestion, which was at times can be very large numbers. If you look at this map right here, it's pretty substantial. It's not always that way, but it's pretty substantial there. So there's three components. The other product I'm going to talk about is transmission, TCRs, transmission congestion rights. And is what that does is, I mentioned you're injecting at that price up in Nebraska, and you're withdrawing your load down here in your city. There's a product that hedges that. You have the right to that basis between those two numbers. So we have to optimize that. We at KMEA optimize that transmission right. I am imagining that Sunflower has those same transmission rights, and they're like most utilities, they flow that number into your system average cost. So they would hopefully do a very good job of optimizing that transmission right, and because one might be injected at a lower price than what your load is, and they would be able to throw that benefit into that cost. The way we do it is since we don't do the socialization, we give you the money directly. So we show you what we were able to make on that transmission right, and we optimize it. We have a third-party vendor that helps us optimize it, gives us information as to what we should take ownership of and what we should not take ownership of, what would be a good hedge, what would not be. So we do that. Yeah, okay, it's okay.
I mean, you can go into a rabbit hole. Trust me, you guys can't get out. It confuses me. But just know that we've got ways that, if you buy a fixed contract, that there's ways to hedge financially to make sure you're optimizing that.
Certain
that
situations,
contract.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to do. Know what you're good at and know what you need help at. So what we feel we need help on, load forecasting, we pay a third party to give us a load forecast for our cities. Because you have to have, across the Kansas footprint, we would have to have 30 different weather forecasts, and we would have to analyze that. So we pay for a load forecast for all our cities, so that we have hourly and real-time load forecasting for our cities, so that we can better optimize what your load is and to serve it as reliably as possible. Additionally, we pay for a consultant to give us advice, to analyze those transmission paths that we just talked about, to give us advice on which to hedge and which not to hedge, and how much of them to hedge for each individual resource. And so know what you're good at, know what you need help at, and it's been extremely beneficial. Yeah, and
Lots of dollars.
we've married up with a couple of good entities that help us on both those. The one that does that piece is also a non-for-profit, municipal-centric utility, the Energy Authority, just so you know. And that's really their only focus is to help municipal cities, not for profit. So we married up with them to give us that service. The other thing that SPP does transmission and reliability studies. So they're gonna decide when a transmission pad needs to be built, either for economics or reliability reasons. So it used to be historically, Sunflower, Evergy, Midwest Energy would decide what to build on their own system. That really doesn't happen right this second. Right now, Southwest Power Pool, which was really created because FERC wanted an overriding market to make decisions so that everyone was treated equitably, said, no, your RTO, ISO has to make those decisions. So, they analyze and decide what transmission to build and what doesn't get built.
Was the initiation of that really because of, or one of the initiators of that was the fighting between Westar and KCP and how, between the generation up in north?
I'm not saying that wouldn't be part of it, but it's even bigger than, this is at FERC, the FERC level comes up with that policy. This is, and FERC, the folks that are on the FERC, I think there's three FERC chairmen, or there's 3 FERC members that are appointed by the President of the United States. And you can see different presidents with different ability,
Goals.
different feelings on deregulation, on who should have access to the market. What presidents might be more beholden to an investor-owned utilities on wanting to do what they want to do. So, and I didn't mean that negatively, but really they have the personality of who appoints them.
Sure.
That's what they have. And back, the FERC orders, previous version of this presentation lists out the FERC orders, I think it's 888 and 889.
Right.
And those were done about 20 years ago. And those made equal access to everybody of that transmission system. And you also needed someone to implement a transmission system that worked. One of the problems that really happens, and I'm gonna try to go faster now here, I've been trying to go up. But one of the problems that really happens is, out in Western Canada, you got an awful lot of wind. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting a wind turbine out here. You got a lot of wind over here. The load is actually on the total eastern part of the state.
Right.
So you need transmission to go from point A to point B. If I were Sunflower or Midwest Energy, and I wanted to keep my prices low, and I had 3 different companies that built wind farms in here, I wouldn't want to build transmission to let that cheap energy go west, or go east. I wouldn't want it to go east. But, because basically all that transmission that gets built, that allows that cheap energy to go east, increases the footprint over here. So you had to have really an unbiased company, you had to have something that is really looking for the good of the cause.
Right.
And the good of the cause means optimize the entire system. So they built over $80 billion worth of transmission in like 10 years. I mean, they built a lot of transmission to go from west to east and north to south. If you kind of think about those numbers. And in every case when it happens, you know, if it's for economics, it's because it's now increasing someone's price to lower someone else's price. Because the megawatts didn't change. I mean, they're still the same. So, in any case, that's regardless. Last thing I'm gonna talk about, energy alerts. You probably get energy alerts. You can sign up on a Southwest Power Pool website so that you get those energy alerts. I'm assuming Sunflower tells you when there's energy alerts going on. We also inform our cities when there's energy alerts going on. There's actually multiple stages of what an energy alert is, and you're probably aware of it. I gotta read it, my vision isn't very good. So there's weather advisories and resource advisories is what I have done right there. Those happen all the time during the winter and summer. I mean, we're talking 20 times you would get those. I have not, we internally talked a lot about this. I haven't passed that on, I don't pass that on to cities. I keep that information and we kind of acknowledge it. We would generally call a city that has a resource, behind the meter resource, and ask them if they have fuel for it, make sure they're prepared to run. And we called all ours, like back in December, we had a series of
Cold
weather
winds.
alert and resource alert, that it actually got up into EA level 1 back in December. But back when about a week earlier, actually about 4 days earlier, they started getting resource alerts. We called all our cities that had generation resource and asked them what was going, what they had available to run, and who was on call during Christmas, and what that person's phone number was on their cell. I had a list. I mean, I had a list from top to bottom, and I brought it home with me, and my operators on the 24-hour desk all had it. So we knew what was going on, but I didn't physically send every city an email or anybody telling them there was a big thing going on. Once we get to conservative operation is really the time to be doing that. Usually you have about 24 hours, 48 hours before anything's gonna happen at that point. So conservative operations is when I sent out emails to all my cities, telling them, hey, there's something going on here. It didn't dissipate because 90% of the time, I'm just gonna have that weather alert or resource alert, and it's just gonna scare people for no apparent reason because they can't do anything anyway. So we inform when it gets up to conservative operation energy alert level, and we'll keep you informed thereafter as we get more information, and that's what we did. The way it's set up within Southwest, well, not just within Southwest Power Pool, this is Southwest Power Pool's notification scheme. NERC actually has an overlying one which says normal operation, then EEA level 1, 2, and 3, which that's 1, 2, and 3. EEA level 1 means you look forward and you look like you might have a problem. EEA level 2 says, oh my God, there's probably a problem. EEA level 3 says, oh shit, there's a real problem, we're cutting low. So we got into EEA level 3 back in 21, which quite frankly, I've been in this business for a long, long time. The first time I've ever been in EEA level 3, first time. Just haven't happened. In Midwest, we thought we were immune to this happening, but you put 30,000 megawatts of wind, you retire coal units, and you have a gas event where everything freezes up and you got problems. So that's what's going on. I'm gonna kind of leave it there, guys. And I can keep going, but you probably are ready to go home. Any questions? This is my next slide, but it is all to show that there's a lot of generation is scheduled to be built that people have put generation X studies for. But if you look at it, it's all intermittent, non-dispatchable, renewable resources. Wind and solar. That's all it is, it's wind and solar. A little bit of battery storage, but not much battery storage even. Just a little bit of wind and solar. There's like 28,000 megawatts within Kansas that looks like it's going to be built in the next 5-6 years. Now, I say looks like, it won't be built. That volume will not be built. That's what people put studies in the Southwest Power Pool, but it's all renewable resources, which means that dispatchable resources like your plant, like the diesel generators are really needed to get a reliable system.
So if I understand it right, if people put wind farms in here, it's only gonna help down the road that way.
It's gonna lower the whole footprint cost. But if we build transmission, if we build a transmission that brings it other places, it will water down your benefit. But the people who are building that generation are building it and selling it to people east.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that's generally what happens. So when there's a vote up at Southwest Power Pool where it talks about base plan funding for transmission lines and transmission projects, Sunflower usually votes negative because they don't want it. Because all it does is increase their transmission costs at the same time they're paying to get the generation out of there. So they vote usually, and we vote on the same side as Sunflower. We vote consistent with Sunflower. That's one case where we have
Common interest.
common interest. There's common interest there. Now we have to kind of weigh that. We have to weigh that because I have cities on all across the footprint, but their opinion really in this particular case, it really is pretty solid. Why should they be paying to increase? Why should their transmission costs increase for the purposes of lowering energy costs over there?
Because
There should be another, there
the
could be
public
another
doesn't
model.
understand that.
No, and it's a hard concept to understand if you're in the business.
I was gonna say, I'm having a hard time, but, I mean, there's a lot of people saying, why doesn't Sherman County get wind farms, thinking it's gonna help us
Yeah, they think it's gonna
And it's
lower
not
our
gonna
costs.
help us.
I don't think it would.
I don't know, it
may
may
lower-
initially, until
Yeah.
they build enough transmission to get it out, but
Depends on what your capacity, I mean, it depends on, unless you're buying energy off of that.
But if, and I don't know what your normal system average is, but say, most of our AMP cities, their average cost over the last year, probably what, 4.5 to 6 cents?
You're talking for the energy or
Yeah,
energy?
the energy.
Yeah.
So, a wind farm is gonna be similar to that, if you're buying, I mean, I wouldn't say putting them in Sherman County automatically lowers your cost.
How much does
That's
it
probably
lower?
not a fair statement.
How much did it lower Coleman? Okay.
And the general
Because we buy
public
it
doesn't
for-
understand that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Colby had a contract with
Misconception.
Midwest, KVA, and the system, back to the system averages, the SPP market price.
Yeah.
Well, part of that market price for SPP was that wind farm built to Colby. It wasn't, we didn't pipe the wind farm to Colby and lower it. So it's a hard concept,
It is
it
a hard
really is.
concept.
I want to say something, 'cause so when he said about 4 cents, about
Uh-huh.
$40, 4 cents, that's a legit number. But keep in mind what I said, a third.
Right.
So capacity, transmission, and energy component of it, of which that's the energy piece, that incremental energy piece over and above some of those fixed price things.
Right.
Okay, So our all-in numbers we sold to our cities, and the reason why I really hate giving it, because you really have to look at a one-to-one, because it has to be a city, if I were comparing you to a city that already has all their capacity behind the meter paid for, so they don't have a capacity payment, they're just buying the energy stuff, so the energy would be there, and then you would also have transmission only. But I have a mix of all my cities, so I had some cities last year that probably averaged a little over 7 cents, and I had a few cities that averaged probably 4 cents on what their all-in costs to us. But it really, the devil's in the detail, and I'm not.
Right, yeah.
You have to look,
Yeah.
you would have to look at one-to-one.
Mhm.
I mean, somewhere like you might be 6, 5.5, 6. I mean, without really analyzing it, but it's not. I heard you listen to that number, but I didn't want you to think that was what we're telling you.
Right.
Because there's other things.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
trying to compare it with
No,
the
you
comment about
no, you
what,
were.
Yeah.
what wind cost.
Right, yeah.
Here, and yeah, you guys are spot on, where just building it in your area doesn't automatically.
Is the same answer for solar then, if we would,
Absolutely.
for, you got all these vendors saying, oh, build solar, build solar. Well, that helps with the capacity as far as just a marginal increase, but there isn't much other benefit to it.
The difference with solar, there's, wind farms, you either gotta build a big one, or you don't build anything, there's really no in between. Now, with solar, you could be a part of a 200 or 300 megawatt solar farm in south central Kansas, and Goodwin takes a piece of that.
Yeah.
And everybody's happy, and you don't ever see it. Or, you've got some cities, and maybe you guys will someday, you can build solar behind the meter, similar to your power plant, and then that is a product that you could have a direct correlation to your rates.
That's a good point. That's
For,
So that
for
was-
for a few hours a day. and it
For a
works
few
out.
hours a day. It's not dispatchable, it's a
Right.
cheap product.
Strangely, you should say that. So on the board. This is
Great segue.
That's great. I'm gonna go over this. I'm gonna skip this. But this is a solar. This is solar. So red and blue are solar. And the red, I believe, is a winter peak. Your blue is your summer peak on your solar. So it has a 70%. So 70% is, so if you build 1 megawatt, you would get somewhere in the neighborhood of about an average of up to about 65% average during the summer season. And it would only be good for how many hours that?
8 to 10 hours a day, yeah.
Winter, it's quite a bit lower, because you have a shorter day, and it also is a shorter peak. So you would have somewhere in the neighborhood about a 40% peak during the winter season. Your actual peak for your city, in the summer, it's right there, those hours right there. In the winter, your peak is here. It's in the morning. You have a winter peak. So that solar really doesn't help you much in the winter time. It's energy, it's good it's not correlated with when your peak load is.
Right.
And when your peak load is correlated with peak price, so they're pretty much interchangeable.
There's a couple benefits, but it's not beneficial to the overall.
Well,
I mean, there are benefits to it though, but
Especially in a project based where lowering your peak or not buying on-peak energy, that's probably the most highest priced
section of it, yeah.
When Tom talked about buying it per hour, that's when solar behind the meter for those cities can be an advantage. A system average, it kind of gets diluted.
Yeah,
May not.
okay, so the two different models for the hourly average, it shows up as a bigger benefit then.
You're
A little bit.
covering, typically at the peak day, that's the highest priced energy, and I'm not saying every time.
that's a good proxy in the summertime.
In the
Good proxy in
summertime.
the summertime.
So that's when the output of the solar is at its highest, so you're offsetting the highest priced market.
So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So this is what is being, it's in the generation interconnect study at Southwest Power Pool. This is what folks have put in that they want to build, solar. This, and the green,
Oh, yeah.
green is Kansas right there. 13,000 megawatts of solar. It usually takes about 4 or 5 years to get through this interconnect
Oh, yeah,
study.
yeah.
Now, if half that gets built, I'll be
surprised.
But that's a lot of generation. If you look at that one, and then you look at wind, another 7,000, so that's 20,000 combined. Thermal, the hybrid is battery and solar, and then you got just battery. Thermal is the only thing that's dispatchable, so you have 166 megawatts of dispatchable. Everything else of the 28,000 is non-dispatchable and projected to be built within your group, within the footprint. So there's not a lot, so that means you're gonna need something dispatchable. Your generation plan is gonna be very valuable.
It's how it's utilized and how it plays.
Yeah, but the work that SPP is gonna have to do to regulate that generation, which is non-dispatchable that we just looked at, and additionally the wind generation, which is already out there that we looked at before, it's gonna be difficult.
It's creating other problems.
Absolutely creating other problems.
SPP they had a big job 5 years ago. In 10 years, managing
The dips,
the grid on a day-to-day basis is gonna be, it is way over my head anyway.
and we'll probably have other events like the 21 event because of that.
You might have a summer event like the 21 event where all those resources all of a sudden, the wind doesn't blow and the sun quit, and oh no, nobody has dispatchable. You could have
Right.
issues.
I feel for Sunflower a lot on this part, western part of the state, because they're forced to run out of merit generation that's not economic because of the reliability of the rest of the system. Because you have so much wind over here, they're forced to run a lot of that generation out of merit. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
adds on the cost.
There was a lot of people that called up during December when Texas got the ice. They were almost in panic mode. We're gonna have another event. Haven't been informed of that. You need to relax.
I had multiple cities call me.
Yeah.
When they would see some of the news, or their local Midwest Energy would call them up and tell them, this is what's going, they would say, you have to worry, something's gonna happen here, and they would call me and say, why aren't you doing anything? Why aren't you telling me anything? Just take it easy, we're watching this,
Yeah.
we'll keep you informed.
That event was different because it wasn't so
It was-
regional.
Yeah, it was just
I mean,
Texas.
it was just
And that's what
a
we
little
told them, it's
pocket.
just down there, it's not the whole Midwest.
Erie was different because it was a third of the country froze up. And not only froze up, but really froze up in areas that typically doesn't.
Yeah.
So, God willing, we don't have another one of those, but
What you're describing though, seems to me the likelihood is increasing even if it's marginally.
I think that, and this is my uneducated opinion, the variability in the market is gonna get crazy in the next 10 years.
I think after every one of those type of events, this isn't the first, that Erie type thing happened. If you go back 15 years ago, it happened other times too. We as a country kind of get real excited about it. I don't mean us individually.
Right.
We get real excited about it and says, okay, FERC's gotta tell us.
We gotta do something there and
They
then.
need to do something to those gas wells. They need to insulate, they need to do some thermal, they need to do this.
They're
to protect
responding to the
possibility.
past event, but not addressing the future event.
Within a year, people lose interest on
Yeah.
the federal level that would allocate the resources to do that work. That's just my observation. Please don't record that. Hopefully we're not.
The Jayhawk
I
down
do.
by Ulysses
Right.
is a probably one of the linchpins for the issues in Erie.
Well,
Couldn't get gas out.
for this area.
For this
area.
Couldn't get gas
Couldn't get
out.
gas.
Period.
And what's the economic basis to fix that?
Not much for the owners of the jail.
Well, it works every day. It works all but 3 days a year. Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
what's the
There's
problem?
not an economic reason for them to do it unless they're forced to do it by someone else. And if they're forced to do it, they gotta come up with the money. And we're giving money away to build wind farms. So,
For the people in the cities.
we're-
For the people in the cities.
Yeah,
Thank
for
you.
the people in the cities.
No, actually, the government subsidies on wind and solar got extended with this last IRA bill. It goes to 2034. Right. So, no, sorry. So there's still, and wind usually does a production tax credit. Solar is an investment tax credit, so it's paid on the amount you invest in that, not on the production cost. So a little different. But with solar, within that IRA, the tax rules are changing where cities can now take advantage of the tax rate. Before, it was only investor-owned could get the tax rate. Now cities, if you build a 2-megawatt solar farm, you can get a direct payment for equal value of what that tax benefit would be, which would lower, in theory, lower the cost of that development. Which is a huge win for municipalities, because before, with solar, they were essentially forced to use a third-party investor to build them. Because to make them even remotely cost-economical, you had to do that.
I think the only county you do is actually know that.
Oh, yeah, I don't know that you could put anything manufactured.
Oh, we can't.
Yeah,
But they take like 18 months to 2 years to build, so,
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
you know, here shortly, you probably could get it in the works if you wanted to.
I'm just, yeah. Well, any other questions y'all have? We'd be happy to answer anything you got.
This has been good, I think.
Been quiet over there for a while.
I've asked my allotment already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Either of us be glad to answer any questions.
And staff, we've talked quite a bit, you know, I work with Mary a lot on the Tantalus project. Obviously, Justin's on the exec board, so we see him monthly, so whatever we can do to help you. You're a current member, so anything you need out of us, we're here to serve the members, so. Even if it's something we don't have up on that board, and you go, hey, you think you could help? That's how cool things get born. And if you need it, odds are, several of our other members need it.
Any chance you want to buy out our electrical contract?
Yeah.
Guaranteed revenue stream.
And it is, you know, we're in 2023 and you got till 2026. In all seriousness, and we're not here to sell you anything, but that is something, it does take time to start, for Neil to start building a portfolio and figuring out where those resources are gonna be at that time. So if that's something, you know, we'll really probably need to start talking in the next year.
Oh, we finally got down to a year.
Hopefully, you
Yeah.
got it from my presentation. I'm truly not anti any utility. I worked for investor-owned utility for 25 years before I started working at KDM. So I'm truly, I'm just trying to show you what how do we do. I will say we have one city in city of Lindbergh. They started probably 3 years early, and they had a GFR, which is kind of an equivalent type product that Evergy sells, Westar sells. And they went about 3 years earlier, and they bought a piece of Dutton, they bought a piece of a wind farm. They bought, they bought some energy product. I mean, they started phasing stuff in with some need start dates, early. And I don't know if you were.
Or they allocated it to another one.
But
I think they allocated dogwood to
Yeah.
another city.
we got
for a
creative
year.
with them.
Until they can take it contractually.
Yeah, we got creative with them in that we found that, well, the other internal, cities all want to help each other. They really do. I mean, it's really, cities want to help each other, at least in Kansas. They wanted to buy into dogwood. They didn't have a need for it. They couldn't even take it into their system for 2 years. And so another city stepped up that was already buying a piece of the city, and we'll take it. And they took care of that piece for a period of time. So those things are all possible, and we're, so it's never too early to start looking.
So how
Get you
often,
out of it, and we can start looking.
so you have like the different projects like dogwood that
Yeah.
people buy into. So how often do those new projects come up that you're able to buy into?
We talk to vendors and originators every day. That is what Neil does. I mean, literally, that's what he does. And he tries to weed through the minutia instead of presenting 5 different wind farms to you or solar farms to you. He'll pick the ones that he thinks are the right one. He'll say, yeah, this one's the economic one for a large group of our cities. This is the one we need to hitch our wagon to or show to people as a good viable option that we think we can close this deal. And likewise, and by the way, dogwood, I wouldn't recommend for you because you have plenty of capacity behind the meter.
Yeah.
There's no reason for you to buy a capacity resource with energy when you have a capacity resource here. So I wouldn't recommend, that city didn't have any capacity. They were from zero. They still don't have any internal generation, but they have the dogwood and they have a lot of other resources to cover their needs in those good places. So that wouldn't be what I would recommend, but definitely like a Buckeye, like a wind farm or a solar array or just an energy product going forward. Those are all very, very real. Those are good products. Good products. And as soon as when he gets them, we'll put you on the list and he'll come show them to you. Well, you'll see them. We'll see them when we do.
Yeah, Neil was out here several years ago.
Dating?
Yeah.
He would have been probably that you, when they were doing the MP. You might have been here.
Oh, I was here when we did I was here.
You just didn't have the right color.
No, it was, you know what, I will say this, I think we provided competitive attention for your negotiations here.
And that's what we're here to do.
And I'm not sure that wasn't the theory all along, but I think we provided that for you, and hopefully it worked, and you got a little better deal than you would have otherwise.
We're here to help you get a good deal. If that's using our resources that we can do, great. If you can negotiate a heck of a deal, great.
Absolutely.
But you're describing that the landscape is changing
It is.
almost annually,
It is.
if not more.
It is.
And whatever negotiations happened in the past, we need additional expert advice
Yeah.
in order to make decisions going forward.
One of the things that I hate to digress, but so we have a GRDA contract that we've had for 22 years or whatever, it has 2 or 3 years we've been on it. When that first contract was initiated, it's a system-based product. It was hydro and coal. It was a cheap product for everybody. A lot of things have happened. They've had to retire some coal plants, they built some gas, they put in intermittent renewables. Hydro's not as high as it used to be. That product isn't as pretty today as it was 25 years ago because that utility bought a system average product for that period and their portfolio of resources has changed. Knowing what we know now, would you rather have control over your resource mix long-term, or would you rather someone else have control over it? So when you buy from someone else, they have control over that resource mix because it's their resource mix.
It's their
They have
decision.
legacy investments that they can't get out of, they're done. And you're stuck with those resources, not, once again, benefit and decrement, there's both. But we have that product that has been a good product for the first 15, 16, 17 years. I mean, last years, it's with SPP changing, everything going on with retirements, that product hasn't looked as good as it did the first years because of the portfolio design. Because of their resource mix that year.
So how often do KMEA members get to change their resource mix? Is that all?
You buy them, you buy them. Those contracts are for the, those contracts are
For the lifetime of your
term
membership.
of those products, with those, you're buying those for the term.
Okay.
And to be honest, we recommend staggering terms. We don't, I wouldn't recommend anyone go out and lock up 100% of their needs today. That would be I would stagger, I might do 30% with a 5-year termination, 30% with a 10-year termination, and maybe 30% yearly. That's a winging it. Neil Daney is the one who does, he really, that's what he does. But you wouldn't recommend one term or one transaction. You'd recommend a couple of different types of transaction, maybe buy a little solar, buy a little wind, technology from someone else, different terms on all of them, different energy mix. So you're not locked into one technology and one issue that could happen. A little bit like your 401k.
I was
I was gonna say, it's
saying the same
a
thing.
whole lot like
That
stocks.
way,
I think that's the
if
analogy.
Yeah.
you owned 100%, and I don't know if this is accurate, but you own 100% coal. Well, you're tied to whatever the price of that is.
Yeah.
But if you've got pieces of 6 different resources, well, if one goes bad in a storm Uri, oh man, that's terrible. Well, it's still only a sixth of your portfolio, so it was ugly, but it kind of gets washed out within your own portfolio.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how Neil looks at it. It's like, he doesn't want you to have one asset. It's 3 or 4 or 5 that can kind of blend those costs, not only annually, but, over the life of the contract.
Yeah. Dogwood is a gas unit, gas only. If a utility had that as their only energy supply, they would have gotten hurt during the February event with the community gas. So it wouldn't have helped them. So the cities that we did, they have, maybe 5 megawatts of that and 10 megawatts of something else and 10 megawatts of something else. City of Russell is one of the cities. They have 5 megawatts of that. They're a 28 megawatt city. It's type 5 megawatts. It's pretty, it's really nice in their portfolio. It didn't perform them, but they have diesel units behind the meter that all perform very, very well. And they also have, other energy, baseload energy contracts that were all there. So it's an approach that gives you some flexibility.
Any other questions, guys?
We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having
us out. Anytime I get out, guys, I'll come out.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys coming out. This has been very informative, and you've done a great job of just kind of explaining the different types of markets there are, and just kind of how it all works. So thank you very much.
Hey, we're happy to help. We'll do anything you need.
It's a complex thing. I did it for pushing 20 years in my past life, and I'm learning things every day from these guys. Like, oh, really? That's how that works? So it's a hard thing to grasp, but they've done a good job kind of boiling it down to us layman's guys. So it's good. Absolutely. All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn, 7:03 p.m.
So moved. Oh, okay.
Have a
I'll second.
Motion by Commissioner Showalter, second by Commissioner Redlin. All in favor, say aye.